Episode 1 of Sterling Point begins with Annie getting ready for her big day. She's nervous as she awaits the results for getting into her dream college. Now Annie does eventually receive an email, but she starts crying, processing the news. It's not good. She's been rejected and immediately thinks her life is over. However, Annie's twin brother Connor continues to wind her up and eventually she splits. None of this is helped by the fact that Annie's totally not gay boyfriend Oliver was about to head off to Thailand for the summer. It's rather awkward as he clearly doesn't want Annie to come with him. Before they can talk about this further though, Connor bursts in with big news. Their grandpa has just died. Now when Oliver leaves the house, the family discuss the inheritance that Annie's grandfather, Gordon, has left her. It turns out she and Connor have inherited Sterling Point when they turn 18. This is a small island in the Muskoka area of Canada. There's also a letter for Connor and Annie, but their father, Stephen, holds on to that for the time being. This gets Annie's spidey sense tingling that night, and, unable to sleep, she breaks into the family safe and finds a ton of letters from Gordon that Stephen's kept all this time. All of these letters were from her granddad, and despite barely knowing him, she soon realises that that's because Stephen prevented Gordon from having a relationship with the kids. Now in one of the letters he apologises for not reaching out to Annie sooner and explains that Sterling Point may hold the key to her gaining some answers about her life. This also happened to be her mother's favourite spot too. So Annie decides to head out to Sterling Point by herself and tries to convince Connor to cover for her while she goes. He agrees, but immediately Annie comes unstuck. The flight does not go well, given Annie completely underestimates the flight time and takes sleeping medication. When she lands, yawning the whole time I may add, Annie is introduced to Ellis, a fresh-faced kid that'll be her pilot up to Sterling Point. Now everyone around these parts knew Gordon and seemed to have a pretty good opinion of him. As Ellis leaves, Annie heads up to the house to look around. Now after doing so and exploring the house, Annie ends up meeting Joe. To get anything from the mainland, Joe explains that they need to ferry items via boat and he's the go-to guy for this. However, there's a bit of a problem. Annie doesn't have a driving license or boating license to get any gear, so I guess it's time for some makeshift boating lessons. So with Ellis out, Joe reluctantly turns to Una to help. She has a cute little sister called Maple, while Annie immediately tries, and fails, to learn how to drive this boat. It's here we also learn that Una was born in Amsterdam and has a pretty dysfunctional family, moving from Paris to England then over to Canada. Una's mum has dipped over to India for the summer and seems to have made a habit of not being there for her kids. We also meet Sully too, a kid who's friends with Una and rather eccentric, working at the local cafe. Annie and Una vibe pretty well until Ellis returns. There's tensions between Una and Ellis, while Annie is shocked that there's no network out in these parts and she's not able to use her phone. The bigger problem, however, stems from what's going to happen to the island now that Gordon has passed. He was in charge of the whole island, and with him gone, it opens the doors for developers to come in and potentially upend those living under Gordon's care. The island itself is also worth millions, and it dawns on Annie that this is how much she and Connor are now worth, given the island is theirs when they come of age. That afternoon, the kids head off to a party. When they arrive, Annie meets up with Rory, who happens to be a kid she was friends with in middle school. Now, Rory's mum Denise used to be close with Annie's mum too, so Annie heads down to meet her. Denise is rather unhinged, leaning hard into wine mum territory, but she does reveal some startling bombshells. Annie's mum apparently filed for a divorce from Stephen, and Annie had no idea about this and it hits her like a truck. Annie is eventually dropped back at Gordon's house after the party, while Joe realises Annie is Gordon's granddaughter. He also knows about the inheritance too. However, Annie soon learns that she's not alone. When she steps into Gordon's house, she finds a strange girl who questions Annie over why she's inside her grandfather's cottage. Episode 2 of Sterling Point picks up after that big cliffhanger ending. Over at Sterling Point, Annie finds herself face to face with a girl called Ramona. Ramona explains that Gordon was her grandfather, and it soon becomes clear that Annie has a half sibling she never knew about. Annie struggles to actually explain her situation, and after crying, getting kicked out, and eventually being allowed to sleep on the couch, the pair struggle to sleep. Now Ramona has a letter of her own from Gordon, and she likes to smoke weed too, explaining her paranoia I guess, while Annie is awoken by the creepy clock downstairs. Now in the morning, Ramona forces Annie out after tipping her off the sofa. Annie reluctantly grabs her stuff and goes without explaining anything, and down by the water, Annie decides to use a canoe to find her way, but it winds up losing her oar and eventually her luggage too, which doesn't go down well. This is the girl that's trying to get into business school, by the way. Thankfully, Rory shows up to save her. He also brings Annie over to his place, where he reveals their self-service at his pad. Annie phones Connor to break the news about Ramona, and she's determined to figure out the truth about their family. However, all the while, she continues to lie to their father about where she is. Just before they part ways, Connor breaks the very unsurprising news that Oliver has come out publicly to everyone that he's gay before telling Annie. This officially means they've broken up.
Oh no! Anyway.
Meanwhile, Ramona shows her face to the gang we met in episode 1, and they're shocked to see her. They all greet her warmly, and it seems like Ramona used to work with Ellis too. She's been gone for a long time, having looked after Gordon by herself, while he fell ill and eventually passed away. Given misunderstandings are in vogue right now, the one between Ramona and Annie continues throughout the episode. The Marina gang discuss exactly who Annie is, although they chalk it up to her just renting the place. Ramona eventually heads back home and does some digging, while Annie ends up at another party over at Rory's place. When Annie realises everything she knew about her mum is wrong, Rory comforts Annie down on the dock. Nauna winds up seeing Annie at Rory's place too, while she's working in the kitchen, and after getting fired for waving a knife around, feeds back the juicy gossip to Ramona. Ellis winds up a bit jealous of Annie and Rory here, while Ramona remains determined to get to the bottom of this and figure out the truth. When Ramona confronts Annie at Rory's place on the dock, the truth comes out in front of everyone. Ramona forces Annie in the boat with her, and the pair eventually hash out their differences alone away from the crowd. Annie explains here that Stephen and his new wife adopted Annie and Connor when they were newborns. Annie was under the assumption that her mother died of cancer when they were 2, and Annie never knew anything about Sterling Point until Gordon died. The letter mentioning Annie needing to find her seems to have been referencing Ramona too. Ramona had no idea about Annie either, but she refuses to believe they're blood related given the adoption. Ramona eventually tells her to go back to New York. That night, Ellis catches up with Annie and explains that Ramona has had it pretty rough these past few years. However, Annie is still reeling over Denise's revelation that it seems her mum had an affair and left when she was younger. Given this is far from being resolved, Ellis encourages Annie to stick around. Meanwhile, Una and Ramona discuss the unopened letter she has from Gordon. Eventually, she tells Una to read it, but within the letter it confirms Annie's story, and Ramona starts to realise that the pair have a lot more in common than she first thought. Ramona confronts Annie that night, and on the dock encourages her to come back to the house. Episode 3 of Sterling Point starts with Annie awoken by Ramona hammering on the roof. The pair are still awkward with each other, especially as Ramona brings up how she's fixing the place up so she can live here all year round. Given how painful Gordon's death has been on her, Ramona feels like she needs to get rid of some of the furniture and spruce the place up so it's not quite so painful to be around. Ramona has a box of old stuff to get rid of to the thrift store, but a lot of this actually belongs to their mum. While Annie is happy to revel in the memories, Ramona just wants to be rid of them. She won't even try to reason with Annie here, who finds a mixtape labelled Goldie, their mum's name, and heads off. Meanwhile, Ellis overcharges customers and pockets the extra cash for himself. Nobody seems to suspect a thing, as Ellis claims that the island is cash only. Outside, Ellis runs into Annie and agrees to hang on to the thrift store box of gear for her. They do head to the store though, indulging in some retail therapy. Annie wants to help get some bits for Ramona and suggests they organise an intimate gathering to commemorate Ramona. Ellis though doesn't think it's quite such a good idea. Now Rory rocks up while Annie is in the middle of buying a new chair for Gordon's pad. After helping get it back, Ramona isn't exactly happy given the pair's contrasting tastes. Ramona knows Annie is a lot, but at least indulges her a little, thanks in part to some words of wisdom from Sully, but she's not happy when she overhears Annie listening to Goldie's mixtape. Within the tape, Goldie mentions how much she loves Joe, the same Joe that happens to be Ellis's father. Ramona heads out the house and immediately over to see Una at her houseboat. At the same time, Annie arrives to confront Joe. She quizzes him about the mixtape, but Joe plays coy and claims he and Goldie dated a bit at high school. They lost touch though when she moved to the city, and after a little trip down memory lane, Annie hands over the tape for him. In the morning, Ramona returns and shrugs off Annie's apology. She explains it was hard for her to hear Goldie's voice, and take this trip down memory lane. As they sit together, they talk a little about Una, and it seems like Ramona may actually have the hots for her friend. Elsewhere, Stephen learns where Annie is thanks to a call from Oliver, coupled with Connor caving and admitting the truth. Eventually, Connor agrees to head out to Sterling Point and get Annie back. Annie, of course, is too busy sprucing Gordon's place up, ready for Ramona's party. When Ramona finds out, she immediately decides to head to bed instead. Unfortunately, this intimate gathering turns into a much bigger party, complete with music and drinks. Ramona is not particularly happy at this, given she'd rather just smoke weed and read. Well, Sully then teases her that Una will be showing up, so Ramona heads downstairs and immediately runs into Una's date for the night. It absolutely crushes her. Rory and Annie share a rather tender, slightly romantic moment here, while Ellis, suspiciously absent from the party, winds up fixing up a lamp for Annie at Joe's place. Una catches up with Ramona outside, where Una teases her about being jealous. As they share a moment together, it looks as though the pair are going to kiss, until Una's date Stacy calls her back inside. Now on the porchway, Annie continues to talk until Rory tells her he's going to kiss her. The pair get hot and heavy together, just as Ellis shows up with the lamp he's fixed. He doesn't say anything as he sees them from the window and walks away, dropping the lamp off on the porchway, clearly heartbroken. Now in the aftermath of this, Ramona and Annie talk about the latter's hookup. However, the attention then turns to Ramona's moment with Una. Annie is super enthusiastic about the whole situation and wants to know more. This certainly helps the pair vibe and for Ramona to warm up a little to her. Well, that is until Connor rocks up at the cottage that night holding the lamp. He brings up how the island is worth 22.7 million, and given they all own it together, Connor wants to sell up. That goes down like a lead balloon with the girls. Episode 4 of Sterling Point starts with Connor reeling off all of his plans to turn Sterling Point into a big resort and make a ton of money. Annie's pitch for convincing him otherwise flops entirely, and Connor twists that knife a little deeper with his sister, telling her he can see why Annie didn't get into business school after all. Oof. Now Annie suggests Connor hang around for a week and see how he feels about the place after spending some time here vibing. If he still hates it after that, well, they'll talk about selling. This is a lie, of course, and the girls work together to lead Connor on for as long as possible. Their first port of call, cliff jumping. Meanwhile, Gordon's lawyer, Marjorie Lewis, rings looking for Joe and Ramona. She gets Ellis instead, who's still reeling over Annie kissing Rory. He mopes with Una in the diner, who encourages him to invite Annie out and not let this derail his plans to be the knight in shining armour. Along with this, Ellis also becomes worried over the island's future when he learns from Ramona that the ownership of Sterling Point is hanging in the balance. Just before Annie leaves cliff jumping with the gang, Ellis plucks up the courage to ask her out and she agrees to go to the cinema with him. At the cliffs, Connor and Ramona talk about Una and actually share a pretty nice moment together when he offers some solid advice for her. Annie and Rory, meanwhile, end up getting hot and heavy in the sauna together, while Ellis continues to run his overcharging gig, this time at Denise's expense at Rory's place. Now, Una invites Ramona along to go to the cinema together that night too, but Ramona is concerned. Interestingly, there's extra drama when Denise tells Rory about Ellis's rip-off scheme. Connor is here too, chilling in the hot tub, and the pair talk about Ellis's date with Annie and the possibility of undercutting the girls and selling the island through Denise's connections. When Rory hears, he decides to head off to the cinema gig after all and intercept Ellis. Ellis is still moping, naturally, although Sully offers him some solid advice about opening up and telling Annie how he really feels. Rory isn't so sure that's a good idea, especially given misunderstandings are part and parcel of romantic dramas. Ramona is nervous about meeting Una too, so Connor offers her up some alcohol. Ramona has never actually drunk before, which is weird because she actually smokes weed, so that's definitely not going to be a total disaster. Now as for Annie, she eventually meets with Ellis and the pair have a really good time together. There's definitely chemistry here crackling between them, as Ellis wants to hold Annie's hand and struggles to do so while they get their portraits done. It's a lovely moment, and this time we get the roles reversed as Rory sees them together and grows jealous. Ramona does end up drunk that night, but on the way to the toilet, she ends up seeing Una and her date Stacey Mallory. Yep, she's back. Ramona immediately throws her friend under the bus, telling Stacey she's just the latest in a long line of casual hookups and not anything special. When Stacey leaves, Una confronts her friend and tells Ramona she's misread the situation between them. Apparently the thigh touching and the almost kiss were just fragments of her imagination. At the same time, Rory shows up with his idiot pal Lincoln and spoils Ellis's date with Annie. When Ellis leaves, Annie follows, where they find a drunk Ramona. Joe is not happy when they bring her home and rips into Annie for not looking after Ramona. He also blurts out this is exactly what Gordon was afraid of. As we soon learn in a massive bombshell, Annie's mum didn't die of cancer after all, but actually died giving birth to Ramona. Furthermore, Joe was there when it happened. Episode 5 of Sterling Point picks up with Ramona smoking weed and reflecting on her night. After the drama involving Una, she finds an old Polaroid of the two and it cuts deep. Now Annie speaks to Connor and deliberates over whether to tell Ramona the truth about how their mum died. Eventually Annie does tell her, partly thanks to Connor's big mouth, but it only causes Ramona to spiral further. She blames herself and eventually decides to take a long and dreamless sleep for 5 to 10 years. Meanwhile, Connor goes to work setting up party preparations. Rory rocks up with t-shirts for the big event, but despite being twins, Connor is determined to have the lion's share of the spotlight. The more important looming question here though is the fate of the island, especially with the twins turning 18 and now legally taking ownership of Sterling Point alongside Ramona. Elsewhere, resident moper Ellis finds an envelope stuffed inside the filing cabinet addressed to Joe. Within this, it details taking on guardianship duties for Ramona. Ellis is obviously shocked when he sees this and starts to realise that Joe might actually be Ramona's dad. Rory shows to see Annie next, who's struggling to get through to Ramona. She's relegated to her room, while Una is caught in the middle when her useless mum refuses to come back for the talent show, which doesn't sit well with Maple. In fact, Maple takes part in some anger management with Ramona, smashing plates and getting their frustration out. As they bond, Ramona opens up about how frustrated and sad she's feeling, while Maple has clearly underestimated how difficult it's been for Una to play the role of mum. Both of these girls don't really have a mother, but for very different reasons. Meanwhile, Ellis and Annie head out for a canoe ride together. They confide in one another about what they found out, with Ellis concerned because of Joe's connection with Ramona. Ellis finds Goldie's mixtape in Joe's car and decides to give it a listen for clues. Within this, he overhears Annie's mum talking about the baby and how she can't wait for them all to be a family. Ellis listens to the whole tape and it does seem like Goldie and Joe were madly in love. In the morning, birthday celebrations get underway, with Little Gem Cafe turned into the perfect place for Connor's ego-stroking party. And he even shuns Sully too that night when they show to help him out. Now Ellis gets Annie a birthday present, a really fun drawing of them together on the canoe, after souring the mood slightly about the contents of Goldie's mixtape. Naturally, Rory shows to spoil the party and destroys the entire vibe, explaining how he's got her tickets to go off to a big party together. Looks like Ellis is left out once again. So Annie heads off to a nightclub with Rory, where the pair run into a couple of friends from school. It's a bit awkward before Rory brings up it's Annie's birthday and they all start drinking together. Back at the cafe, Connor is bummed when he learns Annie has left and won't be here with him. Denise shows up and Connor vents about how he's annoyed he actually cares about his sister. In his state, Denise hands over an offer to sell the island, encouraging him to seriously consider doing it. And meanwhile, Ramona apologises to Una for how she behaved last episode. She wants things to go back to how they were, but right now it's tough for her. Given she now knows Ramona has feelings for her, the pair do end up eventually kissing. When Annie gets drunk and winds up sleeping with Rory, Connor tries to enjoy the rest of his birthday on his own. Episode 6 of Sterling Point picks up with Annie awakening at Rory's place. Having slept with him in her drunken state, she's shocked and hurriedly gets dressed, leaving in the morning without even speaking to him. It's rather awkward when Ellis shows up alongside her father. Annie hurriedly rushes off the island and decides they should talk at dinner. She's embarrassed by what's happened before eventually stumbling back to Gordon's. Ramona offers Annie some comfort and is pretty shocked when she finds out she slept with Rory. Annie explains how she's never done anything so spontaneous in her life, except coming to Sterling Point in episode 1 obviously, and vents to her sister about this. As they talk things through, Annie realises she's not 100% sure if she actually used a condom with Rory. Ramona though definitely didn't sleep with Una, but the pair have been getting on like a house on fire. Things are awkward when Stephen sits down with the kids to discuss the island-sized elephant in the room. Stephen explains he kept this whole place a secret because he didn't want the kids to tarnish the image they had of their mother. He never wanted them to think Goldie cheated and had an affair. Stephen explains how he and Goldie had been trying to get pregnant for nearly 6 years, and they did IVF but struggled the whole time. Eventually they separated, but it was only temporary. During this respite, they got a call about the twins, but Goldie didn't want to live in New York anymore. Stephen tried to give Goldie space to figure out why she was so unhappy, but that only worked to push her further away. Stephen didn't file for divorce though, apparently Annie did. She also refused to bring the kids home, so Stephen took steps to honour the initial agreement. Annie's not happy with this and lashes out at her father, before bringing up how Ramona is Joe's kid. She justifies her mother's affair and eventually things sour between them. In the midst of this, the gang show up to collect Maple from summer camp. She casually retorts how she's had her period, prompting Una to get her a period crown to celebrate. They eventually wind up dancing around the fire and howling in the night. Elsewhere, Ellis returns and catches up with Annie. It's super awkward between them, as Annie brings up how she's not dating Rory. She questions Ellis over whether he cares for her, and he chuckles, bringing up how he can't think of a single thing he doesn't dislike about her. It's a pretty suave line and there's a moment between them, but Ellis doesn't capitalise on it. Meanwhile, Stephen shows up to see Joe on the dock and the pair hash it out. Stephen calls Joe and the island a distraction, but Joe bites back, bringing up how he showed in the middle of the night with a lawyer to get the kids back. Joe explains that Goldie didn't love Stephen and isn't even sure if she ever did. The pair get into it, leading to Stephen getting a black eye for his troubles. He then winds up over at Denise's place. Now, she obviously has her own agenda here with the island, but she plays up the role of concerned citizen for Stephen's sake. Elsewhere, Annie reflects on her experiences getting her period and brings up to Ellis how she used to schedule and go to the doctor once a year on her birthday because she thought this was the thing you were supposed to do. Annie feels like she was robbed of a childhood and needs to be fixed. Ellis listens to all of this and tells her she doesn't need to fix herself. The pair eventually lie under the stars together, with Ellis telling her how to build a canoe to help ease her mind and stop her spiralling. In the morning, Joe comes under fire from his wife when she finds the guardianship letter about Ramona. She's understandably pissed at him and questions exactly what sort of man he is. Elsewhere, Ramona and Annie finally seem to be on the same page, and there's a really nice moment where they're all on the boat together heading back to Gordon's. Unfortunately, everything goes amiss when they go back inside the house and find Denise, Stephen and Connor waiting. Along with bringing up how Joe is Ramona's father, Stephen demands they leave and go back to New York. Ramona is shocked and especially confronts Annie, given they promised no more secrets between them. Una curses them out and leaves too, but Ramona has had enough. Episode 7 of Sterling Point starts with the gang trying to find Ramona. She's gone walkabouts and nobody seems to know where she is. Annie blames herself for keeping these massive secrets from her, while Denise shrugs it off and believes Ramona will rock up eventually. Rory is not happy with the blasé attitude of his mum, while Una is worried and believes Ramona may have disappeared again like last time. Despite all these early concerns, it doesn't last long, approximately 5 minutes of runtime, as Ramona rocks up later when Una finds her. She encourages Ramona not to dip out and eventually tells her that she loves her. Meanwhile, Joe realises that Ellis has been stealing cash from customers and confronts him about this. He's clocked up a solid $7,345 from this scheme, and Joe demands answers. Well, Ellis admits he's been doing all of this on purpose, believing they're undercharging customers. He's keeping all of this extra money as a safety blanket, a way to help them if everything goes pear-shaped with the business. They have a lot of stuff to fix around here, and nowhere near enough income to cover everything. Ellis eventually storms off, leaving Joe to spiral. This time though, Ellis takes the initiative when he heads over to see Annie, pulling her toward him into an embrace. The pair finally kiss, and there's a lot more chemistry with these two than there was with Rory. Ramona heads home after and makes up with Annie after their fallout, admitting she's thinking of getting Joe to sign some paperwork to waive away guardianship duties. Meanwhile, Rory starts to spiral as he talks to Connor about Annie's feelings towards Ellis. When Annie pops over, looking for her dad, the pair awkwardly smoke weed together and talk about Rory leaving Sterling Point. He's not starting school for a couple of weeks, but he's heading over to the dorms early all the same. He offers Annie a chance to get into the same college and set her back on the path she had before she left for Sterling Point. However, the island has clearly changed her, and Annie has decided she's going to stick around at Sterling Point and possibly live here. Rory doesn't take the news particularly well, and shades of Stephen come through in his standoffish nature. Ramona eventually heads back to see Joe here, who explains that he wanted to respect what Gordon wanted. He had just lost Goldie, and Ramona was the closest thing he had to her. He knew Gordon would give her the best life possible, so he kept her at arm's length this whole time. The original plan was that Goldie and Joe were going to leave their partners and be together and raise the kids as a family. When Goldie passed though, they all believed this was the best thing for them, but deep down both Gordon and Joe were consumed by guilt. Gordon did his best to try and connect them together though. After hearing him out, Ramona has heard enough and hands over documents for Joe to sign away guardianship duties. Joe refuses though, wanting to fix what's broken between them. Ramona refuses to listen to him until she finally reads Gordon's final letter back home that night. The tears flow as she realises what Joe's saying isn't too far from the truth. When Ramona speaks to Annie that night, she mentions colourblindness and it gets her thinking. She confronts Stephen with a kit and believes he might actually be her biological dad. Episode 8 of Sterling Point starts with Ellis and Annie together looking out under the stars. Annie is more convinced than ever that Sterling Point is where she wants to be, and Ellis doesn't seem to be going anywhere either. Now after a big old montage to start the chapter off, Ramona finally learns that Steve is definitely her biological father. It's a perfect match. Ramona immediately sits down with her dad alongside Annie and Connor to discuss what this means for them. Annie is a little annoyed though, given she wasn't aware of this initially, but she sits trying to process that Stephen is more blood related to Ramona than she is. Now that she has confirmation though, Ramona offers up the guardianship documents to Stephen for him to sign, waving away guardianship so they can all move on. Stephen is visibly hurt by this, but he keeps it to himself, trying to mend the void between this family. Annie struggles to comprehend everything and she's clearly not okay. Stephen apologises and explains he's just trying to do his best for her. For now, Annie has decided she's going to stick around in Sterling Point for the time being and not go home. Stephen doesn't think it will help fix anything and believes this is all a bad idea, but Annie bites back, leaving everything hanging in the balance between them. Elsewhere, Connor hangs with Denise at her place in the hot tub, trying to process everything by taking copious amounts of mushrooms. Ramona is also struggling, contemplating what to do now that she knows the truth about Stephen. She vents to Una about it and hashes out her options, wondering whether to have a proper relationship with the guy. She's even toying with heading out to New York too. Una is prickly over the whole situation and believes if Ramona leaves the island, she'll forget her and never come back again. Ramona bites back though and talks about how Una is only caring about herself and being selfish about the whole situation. Given her own mum walked out, Ramona pushes her away and Una eventually decides they should break up. In a hurt state, Ramona speaks to Connor about her pain. He suggests they should just sell up the island and be done with it, moving away from Sterling Point for good, especially given Denise already has an offer waiting for them. Connor believes she'd have leverage to cut whatever she wants out of the deal, protecting the other guys and gals on the island, while Connor is already on board with whatever they decide to do. However, Ramona would need to convince Annie. In the morning, Annie and Ramona talk about the island, but she doesn't think it's a good idea to sell up. Annie brings up how New York is a tough place to grow up, and despite the facade that Annie had everything handed to her on a plate, Annie has found things difficult. Ramona has never experienced much beyond Sterling Point though, and smoking weed every episode, and she eventually brings up the promise they made about the island. Annie wants to wait a year and explains she really needs Sterling Point to help her healing. Given Ramona is only 16, Annie implores her sister to think this over before properly selling up. Ramona though wants to leave and experience something new. Speaking of new, Connor has been looking at the genetic DNA stuff too, and he receives a call from the adoption agency not long after, given they found his biological mother. In the middle of all this drama, Annie catches up with Joe on the porch while Ellis is getting the plane ready. Joe explains that Goldie actually had a heart condition and nobody knew about it. She was in pain and Goldie didn't know at the time whether this was contractions or not. Joe rushed Goldie to the hospital where she had an emergency C-section. When she was taken into surgery, she smiled at Joe to reassure him during his worry, and that was the last time he saw her. Hearing this, Annie rushes up through the trees to find Ramona. However, Ramona catches up with Stephen and hugs him, just as he asks whether she wants to spend time with him. Annie sees the pair hugging and makes her decision too, believing they should switch their lives. Ramona will now go to New York while Annie is intending to stay in Sterling Point. The final shot of the season sees the pair switching roles and Ramona awakening in New York. So Sterling Point bows out with an episode that sees relationships mended, broken and eventually tested, as the island's future is still hanging in the balance by the end. We're still no closer to finding out the fate of Sterling Point, and the opening parts of the season seem to hint that we'd be getting this sort of three-way fight for control of the place, but instead we get none of that, and it's basically an afterthought by the end. A lot of the supporting characters have had very little to offer beyond archetypal roles too. Sully is just a quirky gay sidekick, Maple had her coming of age story in one episode, then nothing after that, while Rory is gone from Sterling Point with no fallout or drama over what happened. Wasn't Annie concerned she might not have used a condom last episode? Where did that plot point go? There's no ensuing drama between the boys during the love triangle skirmish either, no fighting between the groups, and very little tension through any of these 8 episodes. And any of the drama that we did see, like earlier in the season when Ramona walked out, was basically resolved after 7 or 8 minutes. In the end, Sterling Point has been a show struggling to find the point of its narrative. It's a series that certainly had a lot of potential that it's basically squandered in the most disappointing way possible. If there is a season 2, and at the time of recording there hasn't been, let's hope that things are a massive improvement over the writing that we see in this first season. Thanks for watching, and do let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Smash a like or subscribe to the channel, your support is very much appreciated. I'm Greg Wheeler, and from all of us over here at The Review Geek, we'll see you on the next video.